Good morning.
I know.
How are you?
I've been very excited about this, Noah.
I'm very flattered, Katie. It's nice to see you again. It's been 25 years or something
It
since
has. I don't think we've seen each other since
you came
I
out to the
was on
set.
the set of ER.
What year was that? Do you remember? I mean, it's
I
probably
think it was. Well, I know I was pregnant with my second daughter.
20th century.
I think it was it was 1996.
Oh my goodness. That sounds
Yeah.
right.
But thank you so much for doing this. Did you hear how I have been stalking you, Noah, and
Yes.
enlisting my entire Instagram community to try to make this happen?
Your minions are formidable and numerous. I
Have you
received
alerted the authorities, Noah?
I've you may get a call from the authorities at some point, just a random interview, just checking you out. No, it was really impressive how many people lobbied on your behalf. I was on vacation in Hawaii with my wife, trying to disconnect from the apex of notoriety that attended the finale week. And when I finally turned on my phone, I was like, "Holy shit, Couric is aggressively looking for me."
I know the power of the internet and aggressive being the operative word, Noah, because I would ask my producers every day, have you talked to the Max people? Did they get back to you? What are they saying? And they kept saying Noah is on vacation, Katie.
He was trying to be anyway.
Anyway,
Noah doesn't really know how to vacation, so he was doing his best impersonation of somebody on vacation as he
well,
could
I
muster.
hope you got some time to relax, Noah, because I can only imagine how grueling your schedule has been with this magnificent show. And I have so much to talk to you about. But I wanted the first question to be, what is your reaction to this pretty extraordinary response this show is getting? And I'm not the only one, clearly. You have legions of people for whom this show has been really, really important and really meaningful.
I think that's the distinction in terms of how my work's been received in the past. This one, it feels more profoundly felt in a way. People seem to connect with this show almost medicinally, in these troubling times, to have a show that just highlights humanity and highlights heroic and intelligent people working in the service industry, doing the best they can, with a lot stacked against them. I think resonates with a lot of people right now. So they feel seen and heard, and they want to. It's comforting to know that those people are still out there and could potentially be treating you if you got hurt or sick. Um, so I think, and then if you're from the medical community, I think, the way we've highlighted the fragility of the system and the plight of the practitioner and physician has been accurate.
I think you're so right, Noah. I mean, at a time where the discourse has gotten so bad and people feel so free to be cruel to one another and to demean other people, I think that you look at the characters in this show and they're not perfect, but they're all deeply admirable and they're all giving themselves in service, as you said, to other people. And I think you're right. When I think about why I love this show so much, I think I connect to each and every one of these characters, and they're also extremely believable. And I want to talk to you about the roles and the actors because I know you guys search far and wide for these extraordinary actors, but I wanted to ask you first about the idea because I know when you finished ER, you pledged, I believe, with John Wells, your executive producer of ER, now of the Pitt, that you were never going to put a stethoscope around your neck again. So, what changed your mind?
The recognition that there was another profound story to be told in this arena after COVID, that, every medical show that took place before COVID depicted medicine in America at a certain point in time. And then every show after COVID needed to reflect those radical changes. And I hadn't really seen one yet do that. And I was um, receiving a lot of mail during the pandemic from frontline workers. And I was moved by having been a part of their medical journey up until that point, and I felt a certain responsibility to continue to be part of their medical journey. And
Because they
so,
were telling you ER really influenced their decision to go into medicine, right, Noah?
yeah, well, at that point in 2020, the show had been off the air for 5 years, but if you had gone into medicine in the last decade before that, ER was probably on your radar. And if you went into emergency medicine, it was probably somewhat inspirational. So it was gratifying to know that we had inspired a generation of people to go into a discipline that hadn't been a very sexy discipline before ER came on the air. But it was also disheartening to hear how burned out they were and how disillusioned they were and how um, beset they were daily, not just for their own well-being, but just attending like just a nightmare, of people not being able to be with loved ones as they died, the isolation of it, the unrelentingness of it, the misinformation that attended it, the hostility that has attended it. All of it has taken a very significant toll.
And it did on your character, Dr. Robby, which we'll talk about in a moment, and how you all have been able to address some really significant current storylines in this show. And it's so relevant. But first, I wanted to ask you about the initial show, because I know you had considered following your character in ER, Dr. John Carter, who was sort of this young, freshly scrubbed resident, I guess, right, in ER, and where he would be all these years later. And then you all abandoned that idea. And I was wondering, I don't know how much you can talk about this, Noah, and I want to respect sort of the legal parameters, but Michael Creighton's estate, is it Creighton or Crichton?
Right.
Michael Crichton's estate sued you all, and you kind of pivoted. Can you talk about that at all? Are you able to?
Well, we pivoted and then we got sued chronologically. I
Oh,
can talk about how it felt emotionally. I can't talk about a lot of the legal aspects of the case, but the chronology of events was it, not having an idea of how to push this new story through. It just seemed the most obvious IP would be to use ER and use Carter. So initially, the pitch was to do something more concentrated on that character, picking up the thread of where he was. But that was even an attempt to kind of distance it from the old narrative in order to focus on the very modern story we wanted to tell. And then when we ran into issues with the rights, and it became just problematic to continue, and then ultimately the negotiations broke down. The dialogue between us was, what did we want to do originally? What was the thesis? Well, we wanted to do something that focused on healthcare workers post-COVID. Okay, and what else did we want to do? Well, we wanted to sort of play with the format, see if we could do it and reinvented it in a new way that had the same immediacy and intimacy that ER gave it, but without repeating ourselves with the same cinematic language. And John Wells said, "Well, we could still do that. We could do that. Let's explore that." And that's really where this came from. Was once we realized we weren't shackled to an old narrative or old IP or old characters. And sentimentally, I was sorry to say goodbye to it for sure, because I am still invested in that character and in that show. But this was a new story we wanted to tell, and it suddenly became kind of liberating to be able to tell it freshly.
and I guess they felt it was still too close to the ER concept.
There is a phrase in Michael Crichton's original contract with Warner Brothers that defines derivative work, you know, either broadly or specifically, depending on your legal definition of the word derivative. If that means all hospital shows in perpetuity, or if it just means things that had anything to do with the specifics of that universe. That's above my pay grade.
And I know the whole thing kind of just makes you sad.
Well, why wouldn't it? That was such the last time we saw each other, as we talked about, was 1997 when you came out to the set. That was a heady period of time for me, and a wonderful chapter in my life. And this is the 30th, or last year was the 30th anniversary of that show. It was a moment when we could have all taken a nice little victory lap, and at the same moment, I sort of was pulling my head back a little bit and wanted to talk about it a little less than I usually do.
I do know, Noah, that you were able to get a lot of the ER gang back together. John Wells, the executive producer, a medical consultant named Joe Sachs, some other ER doctors, I guess, and some other people who worked on ER. Um, was that fun to have that whole team intact, or a lot of the
A
members?
lot of that team has stayed intact. John has collected an all-star team of talent through his years of producing, and he's such a wonderful manager of talent that he gets a lot of loyalty, lifelong loyalty. So it wasn't so much that we brought a band back together, but I'd gone off and tried to find a band that I enjoyed playing with as much as that one, and then had some success more than others, and then went back to gig with them again and was like, oh my God, you guys are such pros. It's so easy when you work with such pros, and and it was refreshing to have the touchstone of our history and the nostalgia of the times we've been through. And we've all grown and aged and had families and children, so a lot has happened since we worked together that makes these relationships feel fresh, but enough connective tissue to the past to make it feel like it's of a lineage,
And
not
I
derivative, but of a lineage. I hope I've
thank
made
you for
that
that.
distinction.
Thank you for that specification. I know
I'm
that
in my lawyer's office.
I know. Are there any of them? Um, I read that when you did ER, just to put a button on your ER experience, that George Clooney and Anthony Edwards, who I also met when I was on the set back in the day, were such great mentors. They treated you like a little brother. They created this extremely nurturing environment. And that made me so happy for you because it was such a positive experience. And I was curious if you're trying to do the same for the younger actors on your set now.
Yes, with a little less of the corrupting uncle patina.
Are you talking
You say
about George?
mentor, it's very generous. I think, yeah, yeah, influence for sure. Uh, no, those guys were the greatest big brothers, and I count Eric LaSalle among that as well. They all took me under their wing and sort of made it very safe and very easy for me to play. And I've tried to make myself an equal resource to this young ensemble, but they're very sophisticated. They're very professional. They're very talented, and they don't really need me that way. It's an interesting thing in some ways, I go to work trying to impress them way more than I think they're trying to impress me.
Really?
Yeah,
Well, I want
my father told me if you want to stay relevant in this business, you better figure out how to work with young people and not be the guy that says, you know what we used to do, or you know what you should do. But you got to ask them, like, what should we do? What do you think? And not be threatened by their answers and not be turned off by the possibilities. And I have really taken that to heart. And this ensemble, I was really inspired by.
I think they call that reverse mentoring these days. And I think you're right. I think it's a really smart attitude to have, especially as the world changes at such breakneck speed. I wanted to ask you about some of the cast members because honestly, I love them.
Yeah.
I think I'm liking the show a little too much for my own mental health, Noah, but let me ask you about some of the actors. Let's talk about Mel Taylor Dearden, who's just so wonderful as I guess you would say, neurodiverse doctor who's training. Tell me a little bit about working with Taylor.
Taylor is, one of the more experienced players in our ensemble, given the fact that she kind of has grown up in and around the business. And so she's extremely intelligent, extremely thoughtful actress, deep dive on details. And a lot of that neurodivergent quality came through her performance and was not intended, to be such a part of the narrative. But it always fell within the realm of character and not caricature. And it seemed to be a lovely way of highlighting how people on the scale could be contributing and valued members of teams, and in certain cases will be incredibly, it's almost an asset. So it was a give and take exchange with Taylor as we watched what she was doing and then started to write a little bit more for it. And then it became a lovely dance. And I just thought she did a beautiful job.
She really
Uh,
did. She's so winning in that role. I also love, by the way, I feel bad because I can't mention every cast member, but some that have stood out to me personally is Dr. Heather Collins. I thought I'll just say their characters and you can say their real names.
Tracy Ifakour, yeah, lovely, lovely actress. You would never know that she speaks with a very heavy British accent in everyday life, as do a couple of our actors. Garen Howell, a Brit, uh,
Seriously?
Shabina Aziz, Australian. Suddenly you get these people off the set and you would not recognize their speaking
And in
voices at
fact,
all.
I know Noah that you cast all over the world and you were particularly drawn to people who had experience in theater.
We were looking for a very specific skill set. You know, acting is a big part of it, but then there's styles of acting within that. And we needed people that were really good physical performers because the show lives on its feet. We needed people that would be really adept with props and really good with reams of dialogue that you have to be able to say while you're talking and doing something else entirely. It's a synthesis of action and emotion that it's more of a theatrical training, so we were looking for people that had a lot of stage background. Also, stage performers have a tendency to be very comfortable working in an ensemble. They don't mind sitting there and waiting for their turn. They have kind of a it's not a me, it's a we attitude about work, and that was what I was looking for. I was looking for buy-in. I wanted people to come and hermetically seal themselves in this environment and say, I want to be part of a three-dimensional universe that I'm going to be part of, whether the camera's focused on me or not. I'm going to live in this space and it's going to add to an overall texture that's going to come across. And I think we were incredibly successful on that front.
I
It was
agree.
really validating to see it work because it's such a lovely way to work that if you can make that a model, I think, people would be really happy.
Dr. Frank Langdon, even though he's had some problems, as we know, I think he's
Patrick
one of the
Ball.
guys. I think he reached out to you and said, Katie Couric has really got a thing for interviewing you, right?
Yeah, Patrick's got my back. He's become a very good friend. I just think the world of him, and he's about to embark on a lovely chapter of his life and career. He just got cast in the title role of Hamlet at the down at here in LA. So he's going to be doing Doctor by Day and Hamlet by Night when we go back into
Wow.
production. He's having a wonderful run.
Dana Evans, who plays the head nurse,
Catherine Lanasa. Catherine
is
Lanasa has been around
terrific.
forever. You've loved her in so many things and didn't know that that was her. And now she's finally getting a role that's giving her an opportunity to be known for what a dynamic, wonderful actress she is.
She really is. Dana Evans is the name of the head nurse. Dr. Trinity Santos.
Issa Barriones, we plucked her right off the Broadway stage. She was starring in Hadestown. She's a multi-talented, and amazingly, she's our youngest cast member in the ensemble, but she, in some ways, is the most polished and professional of us all.
I didn't really like her character at first, and now she's really grown on me because
That's an arc,
She ratted out Dr. Langdon, and I guess she did it for the right reasons, but it annoyed me initially.
I love actors, and I'll pay Patrick Schwarzenegger a compliment from White Lotus, who lean into the more unlikable aspects of their character, knowing that it's going to make them seem unlikable. Actors have a tendency to want to be liked, and we can't stop trying to infuse charm into our performances to hedge the bet on the edge. And actors who bravely kind of go into that and then earn the redemption, earn the redefinition in an audience's perspective, I think are really wonderful performers.
And also, I just wanted to mention Samira Mohan, Dr. Samira Mohan.
Slow mo, Supriya Ganesh. I found myself playing a lot of scenes with Supriya this year where I had to yell at her, which was extremely hard to do because she's got these beautiful big brown eyes that look so sad when you're yelling at her. Tremendous character, tremendous performer. She's going to be a big part of season two. We love Supriya.
And finally, the aforementioned, is it Garan or Garen Howell?
Garen Howell.
Garen Howell,
Yeah,
aka Huckleberry.
Garen and Shabana are what I call the snipers in the cast. You don't when we use them, they come in there and they just pick off their moments and they steal the scenes and then they're out and you never even know that they were there. They're scene assassins.
You talked about how challenging these roles are. And I think people have been amazed, particularly medical professionals, about how accurate the language is and the way they're dealing with certain emergency situations. And no, I read you guys put them through a sort of mini medical school.
Yes, we all went through 2 weeks of medical boot camp before we started shooting on the Warner Brothers lot on a big empty soundstage. We had a bunch of medical experts come through and run us through everything from basic anatomy to the procedures, the pronunciation. We watched films and we looked at really gross pictures and we heard testimonials from people. And it was sort of it was rehearsal mixed with education and a little bit of scare tactic to kind of throw the gauntlet down on everybody and say this is going to be unlike most jobs, movies, TV, plays, where you get to come in and pretend. Like this is more like we have to come in and be. So we need you to take this stuff home. We need you to practice with it. We need you to be really adept at it because in 2 weeks, when we turn the cameras on, there's going to be no margin for error. And
Wow.
everybody accepted the challenge, went home with their suture kits and sewed up chickens and did what they needed to do and came back ready.
Well, that's amazing. And it is, the show is so hyper realistic. I have told my friends that I spend a good portion of it like this or under the covers while my husband is like, oh, oh God, whoa. And I always say, can I look? Can I look? Not yet, not yet. And I'm curious how you make these surgeries look so realistic. You know, the baby getting born, the tubes getting stuck, eye surgery, the woman with the fork up her nose, the burn victim. I wondered if you took actual operations and inserted them into the show. How do you?
You're not alone. We get some calls from some doctors asking us whether we were in violation of HIPAA orders showing these procedures. No, it's all the work of wizards in our special effects and makeup departments who make these incredibly photorealistic prosthetic pieces that blend beautifully with the actors that are playing the parts and that we can actually do the procedures on. Usually the patient is underneath the bed and this is all fake torso, so we're in there doing whatever we're doing.
I
But the
mean, it
baby
looks so
delivery
real, Noah.
that baby
It is
delivery was
freaky.
ridiculous. That
That
everything I said I was doing with that baby delivery, I was actually doing. It was it was the realest thing I've been part of. It was amazing that day.
Those people deserve an award. They deserve an Emmy, honestly. I don't know if they're in the makeup. I guess they're special effects, right?
Technical Emmy. I hope to see. I hope to be able to be the one that gives it to him.
I mean, it's truly, truly amazing. And I also love how you tackle, as I mentioned earlier, current day issues. I think the show is so relevant. And let's just talk about some of the scenarios that you all wrote about and that the show focused on. One was the anti-vax parents, which I thought was so powerful. And I know you believe deeply about and you're angry and frustrated about how science has been demeaned, I guess, and not believed in this current day and age. And uh, I think that was really illustrated in these parents who refused to get their son vaccinated and the repercussions. I mean, talk about timely, Noah, for
It
this
was,
measles
well, that was
outbreak.
when we looked like prophets because we wrote those scripts a year earlier in anticipation of where we might be now. We were looking at vaccination rates and dropping and thinking it doesn't take too much of a crystal ball to see that with our international community and lots of travel, we're incredibly vulnerable to a lot of these diseases that we thought we'd once eradicated or neutralized coming back. And prophetically, we just happened to hit the zeitgeist with measles this year, and it was an opportunity to underscore this really unfortunate debate on the vaccine issue, which shouldn't be a debate at all. I mean, yes, there are some collateral cases where side effects from these vaccines have adverse effects in some people, but when you're trying to inoculate a population of millions of people, this is without a question, the only way to do it safely. And if we don't do it, we are going to be at the mercy of things that we saw in history books from 100 years ago of, typhoid hospitals and smallpox epidemics and Spanish flu. And I mean, things that we thought we were done with, we're going to see again. And our healthcare system can't sustain it. We can't go through that again. We have not restocked. We've not retrained. We have not gotten ourselves back to a level of preparation emotionally, you know, uh, materially. It's not a great state of affairs.
I have to hand it to the woman who played that mother because she was so infuriating, but she did such a good job, I think, and a role that might have been very difficult for her to play.
I want to have a lot of empathy for that community because it's not like they come to these decisions, uninfluenced. There is a direct, considered effort to make people have confusion on these issues. And the people that are entrenched in their ideology, I have respect for your point of view. I can see where your logic led you to be where you're at, whether it's mistrust in here or an overage there. There are case studies that would lend you to be suspicious, but not to the extent that you question the expertise of somebody who does this for a living or has dedicated their lives to this, their entire livelihood of 50 years of service in the NIH dedicated to exactly this kind of study. Whatever you are Googling does not put you anywhere near their universe in terms of understanding.
I think people are vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation on this topic because there are still many unanswered questions about people who do have autism. And I think when there's a void like that and science hasn't been able to answer the question, that is when they are susceptible to being misdirected and uninformed or wrongly informed about these issues. So I really
We can be
appreciate.
curious. We can look to every environmental factor that wasn't in place 50 years ago to find why these rates are increasing. I don't necessarily think that the vaccines are the place to start. I think, that's our safety net. Let's look at some of these other things first, like the food we eat.
Right. Or the fact that older parents are having, I mean, there are all sorts of theories that need to be interrogated. The other, I think a number of other episodes that have really struck me as a journalist is the end of life episode where the adult children wanted to take, extraordinary measures to keep their father alive. I thought about my own dad who died at 91, and yet I talked to my nephew and said, can't we give him a feeding tube? Can't we do something? And he had to say to me, Katie, no. And so I had so much empathy for the adult children and so much empathy for you trying to help them help their father in the final moments of his life. That was so beautifully done.
Thank you. That was one of the ones I wrote. I was really excited about having that one to talk about that issue in particular. We see so much death on television and in our I went to go see Sinners last night, which I loved, but the body count is ridiculously high. Um, and I really enjoyed it. But, you take death and you slow it down to real time and it becomes something else entirely. And it's amazing with both that sequence about death and the birth scene showing these two very, you know, uh, ubiquitous experiences. We all go through both of them. You would think we'd be a lot more comfortable talking and showing those in all their complexity, and yet we're really not. But that was gratifying because so many people have aging parents. The baby boomer generation is such a large generation, and they're getting older, and um, it's not easy. It's not easy to say goodbye. It's not easy to find closure in relationships that have been complicated your whole life. And so when we found that lovely Hawaiian ritual, Ho'oponopono, and a book by a man named Dr. Ira Bryrock called The Four Things That Matter Most, I thought, what a lovely thing to put out there as a tool, for people to maybe remember if and when they go through this, as a way of giving themselves a little bit of closure and peace.
Television can be such a powerful medium for opening up these conversations. So I really applaud you because we do not have the vocabulary to deal with end of life issues. And it's something that needs to be, you know, brought out of the closet. The mass shooting, again, very relevant, having covered far too many of these in my career and the pure chaos of that. And of course, the toll it took personally on your character, Dr. Robby. I don't want to give everything away, but that was really incredible. You also address biases in the medical profession, biases about an overweight patient not being ordered a certain test, or biases about sickle cell anemia because people aren't educated about diseases that may disproportionately affect people of color, which is why there needs to be diversity in the medical profession. So I just really applaud you for embracing so many storylines that are so applicable to the modern conversation. Thank you for doing that.
Entirely our pleasure. We were, just trying to be presentational and accurate, and uh, occasionally we put a little bit of our own politics into our scripts. I couldn't resist an exchange about the efficacies of wearing a mask, which turns a little snarky in episode 9. But for the most part, we wanted to just say, this is what people are experiencing out there. Draw your own conclusions and make your own value judgments as you live your life and look at this through your own filters. But this is pretty accurate. Um,
I asked you about a lot of the other characters, but I do want to spend a little bit of time, and thank you for spending all this time with me, Noah, about
it's my
Dr.
pleasure.
Robby,
Yeah.
your character, Dr. Rabinavitch, Michael Rabinavitch, right? I always think of him as Dr. Robby now. And he's quite the polar opposite of Dr. Carter, isn't he?
In a lot of ways, he is. And that was by design, but it was also to sort of plot him. Dr. Carter, for all of his well-intentionedness, came from money and affluence. Was Ivy League educated, and was looking to have an experience in an inner city hospital to round out his education as a man and as a physician, and then found meaning in that work. Robby doesn't come from any of those advantages, and it looks at the life from a very different perspective, and I think it's a more common perspective that more people can relate to as an entrance level to this world. So he seemed like an interesting, complicated avatar to explain sort of what's been happening to practitioners, and in a way, what's been happening to all of us as we've negotiated what's the last 5 years have been, for us in our lives.
Well, you are sort of the avatar for the mental health crisis in the medical community. I remember during COVID, I tried to talk to a lot of psychiatrists and people on staffs of hospitals to find out how they were supporting their medical teams who were clearly traumatized, to say the least, with the things that they were having to do during the pandemic. And I was shocked how few hospital systems really have the support staff for the physicians and the nurses and the other healthcare providers who are going through so much emotional turmoil. So this is really, I think, front and center for your character. And you have flashbacks to the pandemic, to COVID, not to mention the the almost unspeakable guilt you feel about not being able to save, I guess, the man who was your mentor, who was, loved and respected. So talk to me about why you really wanted to dive into that.
I think we have an empathy for servicemen coming back from combat to appreciate what they may have had to see and do. And I think we have an empathy that extends to law enforcement that's similar. Uh, Certainly firefighters, and the risks that they take, we allow a sort of degree of grace for how that may affect their lives. But when it comes to doctors, it's a different thing. Doctors need to be in charge, and they need to be competent, and they need to be intelligent and official and capable and kind of airtight. We need our doctors to not be falling apart on us. So there's a real stigma about reaching out for help within the community because you don't want to admit that you need help because you should be able to handle it because that's the job. You went into this to do this. You asked for this. There's no surprises here. So why are you having trouble sleeping? Why do you need to drink? Or why are you having nightmares? Or why are you angry or argumentative or having suicidal ideation? These things are incredibly common in this discipline. So common that they run the highest rates of alcoholism, drug addiction, divorce, and suicide, not just among the medical specialties, but among all professions. So the fact that there hasn't been a concerted effort to support this community until now, to address exactly what you're talking about, that vacuum of infrastructure to say, this is really hard. is, I think, a growing new trend. And there's a new term called secondary victim syndrome, which isn't, you're not at the shooting, you attended the aftermath of the shooting. It is equally traumatic in terms of the toll it takes on your central nervous system. But because you weren't there at the scene, you don't tend to get the same resources made available to you or the same empathy in seeking them out. So I think that that's something that people are getting more and more aware of, is that the people who attend these tragedies are oftentimes just as victimized by them as the victims themselves.
And I hope these doctors and nurses will get more support and that people will take their mental well-being more seriously. Do you see that happening? Because it certainly
I see it
wasn't
with
during the
younger
pandemic.
practitioners, young people, and you could talk to older doctors about this. I remember asking one of them about young doctors, expecting them to say, kind of, oh, kids today, they all got to have it their own way. They're lazy. They don't want to work hard.
Or they're wimps, right?
Instead, he said, they're amazing. They come at this profession with such a degree of emotional intelligence that we never had before. They understand human nature to a degree that we never did before. And they bring awareness of their own mental health and need to support their own physical condition as almost like a prerequisite for them to do their job. That was not part of the last generation. You were macho and a cowboy if you didn't need anything. And kids today come in saying, okay, I'm going to need this and this and this to give you the optimum performance. And I think that's healthy. I think that is progress. Having that supported by a system that doesn't make it incumbent upon the practitioner to define that for themselves would be even better.
I agree. There's a powerful scene where you do have a breakdown and you recite the Shema, which is a Jewish prayer. And so many people asked me to ask you about that because I think, especially people in the Jewish faith, found that so meaningful and moving. Can you talk about that? And they also wanted to know if you knew Hebrew before you took this role.
I've never played a Jewish character before, and yet, my family is Jewish. But
Your
my
your
family,
your mom, your mom's Episcopalian, your
my mom's
dad's Jewish.
Episcopalian, my father's Jewish.
See, I did my research on you, Noah.
Yes, you did indeed. Uh, I grew up feeling culturally more Jewish, but not practicing and not particularly religious. And then the concept of faith has been something that has become increasingly interesting to me as I've gotten older. And it's something that my family has become more interested in pursuing. So it just sort of dovetailed that the show came at this really sort of amazingly complicated time for Jews in the world. And my family has come to its interest in faith at this time. And here I am presented with this character who has none of those questions at the moment, and almost denies that aspect of himself because he's a man of science and he's seen so many horrific things that sort of defy the existence of God. Um, And I wanted to see what would happen if somebody who was raised with the underpinnings of that, and the sort of framework for it, but then really didn't make that part of their life or existence, were to reach rock bottom where they couldn't rationally find anything to save themselves. They couldn't intellectually find themselves anything, to cling on to. Where you would go to in your darkest, lowest moment. And I thought, well, maybe something from childhood, maybe something that he would have been asked to recite almost, like the Pledge of Allegiance, without understanding its underlying meaning, would be something you cling to. And then in that simplicity, you find the profundity of what it is, which is it is a declaration of faith, or at least a plea for uh, support and and a and a desire to have it really be that we're all connected in this, and this isn't just hell. So I got really interested in doing that, but and then lacing it out in very small doses so that it became a clue path for people to watch this guy who seems to have it all together in the beginning begin to disintegrate, and then at the very end when he can't rely on science to get him off the floor, he's looking for something bigger.
Sounds like there's a lot of Noah Wyle and Dr. Robby. And I read that actually
There's
during,
Noah Wyle in every character I play. I don't know how
yeah,
you can think any other way, but I use work as catharsis for my own orientation and mental health the way that, you know, a doctor does. A doctor fixes other people so they don't have to look at themselves too much, you know. And actors tend to want to get into other skins so they don't have to live too often in their own. So it's not totally dissimilar in terms of uh, it's very different when you turn the magnifying glass inward. And that became the exercise this time around.
I read that you were kind of in the midst of a bit of your own crisis during the pandemic, kind of searching for meaning and feeling a bit lost. And I think I read a
100%.
quote where you didn't have time to, you wanted, you were, I guess, up for a nervous breakdown, but you didn't have time to schedule it or something
That
funny
was my
like
joke. I
that.
was aspirationally thinking about, God, it'd be great to have a nervous breakdown. Wouldn't that be feel so good to just fall on the floor and sob? And then 5 years later, I gave myself the opportunity to have that moment. I just invited the world to watch it.
Well, I think the world appreciated seeing that because it was so, so real. And
Well, I get a lot of mail every day from people, not just first responders, who say they're on the floor a lot, you know, and uh, they're really curious to see in season two how we all, now that we all recognize that we can't go to work and say that there's no problem. So what do we do? And that's what we're going to talk about in season two.
I'm excited to hear a little bit more, but talking about the feedback and the letters you've gotten, Noah. I mean, I think I've heard from so many people, doctors, nurses, and many people who wrote in knowing that we were going to be having this conversation about how much they appreciate not really just the authenticity, and I think that the accuracy, the medical accuracy is laudable, but I think they so appreciate the respect you afford these people in this world. And I know that you have come to that very honestly with your work for an organization that helps people around the world in war-torn regions. And it's something that you really feel in your bones about these characters and the real life people who these characters represent.
Yes, yes, in a nutshell, I'm very impressed by these people who dedicate their lives to helping others, and they do it without a lot of pay. They do it without a lot of credit. They do it um, oftentimes at great risk to themselves and their own personal safety. I think it's angelic work. I think, they're noble people to do it, and I was really gratified to put a light back on this community and say, hey, I think we're forgetting some pretty important people here, or we're banging on pots for them, but that's not really enough. They need a little bit more than that.
And your mom gave the show her seal of approval. She said she really loved it. Your mom was a nurse, right?
Yes, for 20 years. And
And tell me what she said about it.
she was very, well, she's been very proud, obviously, and she's very pleased that her son is on a TV show that everybody likes again. But spending 20 years in the hospital took a toll on my mom in a way that she never really disclosed to me. And after episode 13, she disclosed that it really triggered something for her. She started having all sorts of memories of patients that she lost over the years. And she started talking about a 4-year-old kid and a pregnant woman and a kid that was in a gang. And as she was talking, she was crying. And as she's crying, I was thinking, Mom, I was on a medical show for 15 years. We never talked about this. And she said, Well, that wasn't real. And I said, Well, this one isn't either. And she said, Well, it felt real. And it made me remember this stuff. And it was a really profound moment for both of us because she was sharing it and I was seeing my mom in a way that I didn't really appreciate because each one of those cases she mentioned having lost a patient. At the end of that shift, she came home and made dinner and helped us with our homework and didn't talk about it. And I think that is a wonderful microcosmic example of what most of the people in this industry do, which is they see and do really hard things all day long and then go home and can't or won't talk about it for their own well-being, their family's well-being, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't sit somewhere waiting to get aired and acknowledged. And sometimes it takes, 25 years for it to come up in your son's kitchen after he pokes you with this TV show on it.
A couple quick questions about season two. Is Dr. Robby going to have a love interest? Because I think he really needs one, Noah.
Yeah, I got a lot of like, there was a lot of people saying that they wanted to hug me, him, that he looked like he really needed a hug. Well, the best way I can answer that is that, Robbie, I think, has got a kind of a 6 week relationship sort of shelf life. I think he's a really kind of exciting and romantic and fun guy to be around for a little while. And then it starts to kind of peter off because he's not really good at sustained relationships that require degrees of intimacy and trust that make him uncomfortable. So, um, that's been his pathology. And I think we're curious to sort of explore if he was going to get healthy, what would that look like? What would it need? What would he need to do and be to be able to be in a healthy relationship with somebody is a question I'm curious about answering.
Did he have a little thing with Dr. Collins? I sort of feel that.
Yes, 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 they had a little thing. And it was sort of around when Robbie's mentor, Dr. Adamson, died. So it could have had a lot more potential, but he was not at a place where he was emotionally available or ready to explore that. And I think there was a sort of tragic aspect to a relationship that had potential that was unfortunately uh, cut short. And then we make reference to she may have been pregnant with his baby,
Right. I couldn't figure that out.
well, it was very subtly on the backs of our heads. You had to lean in. You have to have a big screen to get that moment. Uh,
For subtitles. I'm going to have to watch that again because I was sort of sensing that. And then I was like,
you
I don't know. I don't
subtext
know.
titles to get that one. It was on the underline. Um, yeah.
Or do you think you're going to deal with some of the medical cuts to things like cancer research that we're witnessing happening in real time in the Trump
Yeah, I think
administration?
we kind of have to. Right now we're writing season two, and we're in the part of our process where we take a lot of meetings with experts from every aspect of the healthcare system you can imagine. And we're sort of asking them really unfair questions like, can you look into your crystal ball and tell us where we're going to be in 15 months? And they all shake their heads and just say, we'd rather not, uh, because we're really worried about the way this is looking and at the populations that are going to be most affected by this.
And
If
people
there's
who are in
cuts,
the midst of clinical trials, Noah, that would be an excellent storyline about someone who's, on a potentially life-saving clinical trial for cancer, and suddenly the funding disappears and they're basically left.
clinical trials, research studies, and then even more insidious, Medicare is a federally funded program, but Medicare does not fund perpetual care. So if you have a relative that's in an assisted living facility or in an aged home that's being covered by Medi-Cal, and you make cuts to the state programs, which they're talking about, you're going to find people being kicked out of their perpetual care programs, or forced to live in institutions and give up their autonomy, give up being able to live independently or living with their families. It's really draconian what's happening right now, potentially.
And
And
also that, obviously the insurance industry is a huge storyline in real life right now with the murder of that insurance executive and United Healthcare CEO, and the outpouring of anger, interestingly, and support of this young man who murdered this individual. I mean, but I think it speaks of people's anger and frustration with the insurance industry, not necessarily, well, not being there in many instances for doctors or patients.
medical debt is real and it's crushing for a lot of people. And the fear of incurring more medical debt keeps people from seeking treatment. It keeps people from on the job, talking to their employers about being hurt at work because you don't want to lose your job if your benefits are coming through your job. It's a very complex problem that we're actively dramatizing as we speak because it's affects so many people. And there's so many people that fall between the cracks. You might make, you know, not enough to apply for one and too much to apply for the other. So there's this sort of median line of people that fall through the cracks because they're in between the two government programs that assist you. And there's, millions of people that fall in that bandwidth.
Almost done. You have no music in the pit, and that's intentional. And I love your explanation. Can you tell us?
I've given several because we've had to defend that choice so many times. That was not an easy fight to win because it's a very non-traditional thing to do, and music is such a wonderful accentuating color to creating tension, to creating emotion, and but we really felt that if you're going for authenticity, where's the music coming from? You know, suddenly, as soon as you hear violins, you're going to feel manipulated to feel sad. As soon as you hear drums and percussion, you're going to feel an accentuated sense of tension. But that feels like a manipulation where we don't want to be manipulative, we want to be demonstrative. And in embedding you with us without the artifice of filmic sort of embellishments, it's like you're doing a ride along in the backseat of our squad car. You can turn your head, but you can't get out of the car. You're embedded with this unit in a war zone. You're behind, you know, a sandbag, but you're going to listen to everything that's happening around you. And so it's an immersive experience enough to be in the environment with the sights, the sounds, the alarms, the screams, the coughs, the medical jargon, overlapping dialogue, the emotional cadence of the people that are in the room becomes its own soundtrack. And I think it's really quite effective.
I agree. I think it's extraordinarily effective. Are you going to continue with this 1 hour per episode in season two, where it's a 1 hour in the life of an ER? And I forgot to ask you why Pittsburgh, by the way. I know your people are going to kill me, and I promise I'm almost done.
Oh no, we're good. I'm good on time. We're having a home writing day today. I'm working from home. On to your second question first. Why Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh because it hasn't. It's not LA, New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami, Dallas. We've seen a lot of those cities before, and Pittsburgh is a good cross section of population in terms of ethnicity and socioeconomic range. It's also urban, surrounded by rural, so you get a cross section of cases that are farm related or city based. It's remade itself over into kind of being a medical hub the last couple of years. Um, and it's sort of evokes an American city that had an industry that is no longer its defining industry and is trying to find its relevance today in a modern world, which I liked. Um, so it just served a lot of purposes. What was the first question? I
The
already
first
forgot.
question was the conceit of having each episode be an
Yeah,
hour
that,
in the
well, I'll
ER.
quote Scott Gemmell, our executive producer. Why would admit that it was a mistake the first time? We got to do it again. Otherwise, it's sort of admitting failure. No, it was, I think we're going to stay in the concept. It won't be the next day. I think we're going to plot it about 10 months later downstream. Uh, it's already been reported, so I'm not a spoiler to say we're going to do July 4th weekend, holiday weekend. Enough will have happened in the interim that it'll be kind of curious to find out what we've missed out on. That will be kind of fun clue path storytelling. But also, I think it takes a little time for an event like they've all been through to really synthesize, to manifest itself in ways that would be interesting to watch. Um, to a certain extent, Robby was the one that had an Adamson in season one, but having come through this mass casualty event, now everybody has an Adamson, that they're going to have to contend with having been part of their journey. So that's sort of where we're beginning now, is where would they be now given where they just were.
I hope that Dr. Langdon becomes the storyline too and gets help for his addiction issues, because that's a real problem among, in the medical community as well. So
I
that
already told you he's doing Hamlet and going to play doctor. So I inadvertently let it slip that he's coming back.
okay, good, good. That's okay. It'll be our little secret. Noah, I just want to end with a quote by executive producer John Wells. about you, which I thought was so lovely. He said, I watched Noah as a young man go through this complete loss of his anonymity. He has dealt with it by becoming open and curious and available to people, which not everybody does. He's very intelligent, very well read, and fantastically empathetic. Honestly, he's one of the great human beings in my life.
That was an amazing thing to read, and an incredibly gratifying thing to hear from a man that I have nothing but the utmost respect for.
Well, I feel the same way about you. I don't know you very well, Noah, but I'm just so impressed by your thoughtfulness and intelligence.
Does
And
everybody talking to you feel like they're talking to their old friend or their sister? There's something like as soon as you came on the screen, I got giddy, and I haven't seen you in person since 1997.
yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I just feel so connected to you in this show. It's a little crazy, I know, but I think because I have had so many experiences in the medical community and in this world, having lost my husband to colon cancer and my sister to pancreatic cancer and spending lots of time in the hospital and working with cancer scientists who I admire so deeply. So for whatever reason, like my life experience has really dovetailed with and of course I care deeply about these important issues you're addressing in the world. So for some reason it has just really scratched an itch in me. It's just helped me kind of process some things in my own life. So I really appreciate it. And not everyone feels like they're talking to an old friend when I interview them, but I'm really glad you do, Noah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thank
really
you.
looking forward to season two, which I guess will begin in January of 2026.
Yes. Yes. All
Okay,
things.
well, it's just been a real joy and pleasure for me, Noah. Thank you so much. I'm again sorry that I've been
Call off your
sporadically
agents. Call off
harassing
your
you.
minions. I've talked to you. Enough
All
already.
right. Have a great weekend. Get some
Thank you.
rest. And
Really
I hope our
wonderful
paths
speaking.
cross again at some point in the near future.
Me too. Thank you.